Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this very, very important topic about creating allyship in organizations for your Asian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander employees and communities. We are responding to the requests from our BiasSync clients to help leaders show support and help those individuals in their organizations that are really starting to have a lot of emotional burden and concerns around safety and other things that are happening right now. So very much appreciate you joining us. I'm Michelle Ruiz, CEO and co-founder of BiasSync, a solution to help companies mitigate against unconscious bias in the workplace and also measure levels of bias and other things in workplaces to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion outcomes. Joining me is one of our esteemed experts, Dr. Crystal Miller, who is an expert in organizational leadership. She actually is very involved in our curriculum. You'll see her in our professional development content. And she is the former director of leadership development at the California State University Chancellor's Office, which some of you may not realize is the nation's largest, most diverse public higher education system, composed of 23 California state universities. So we're very delighted to have her as one of our experts. Also joining us is Anjanette Mariah Ramey. And Anjanette is actually a business owner. She's a choreographer, an activist, an educator, arts advocate, community organizer, creative entrepreneur. She is from San Diego. She is also very active in the space of advocacy for Asian, Asian American, Pacific Islander communities, is also focused on helping organizations identify opportunities to partner with nonprofit and community organizations as part of their social corporate responsibility or corporate social responsibility, CSR, and other things. So thank you both for joining us. You'll see Matt is on here as well. He's on my team. He's handling all of the technicalities of our webinar today. So Dr. Miller and Anjanette, can we first just talk about what company leaders should be thinking about as it pertains to what their Asian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander employees may be thinking or experiencing in the workplace right now? And we're doing this today, March 23rd. We will be recording this, so anyone will be able to see it after the fact, but I just want to set the context. We're March 23rd. Sadly, devastatingly, just over a week of the murders of 8 individuals in Georgia. Many of them, the majority of them, were Asian women. And then, of course, we've been hearing about the uptick of hate crimes, violence, outright racism being expressed towards Asians just in the world at large. So for organization leaders, what should they be aware of right now at this moment in time about what their employees may be thinking and not maybe articulating?
I just want to say, as an Asian women business owner that has an entire BIPOC staff, with half of them being AAPI, we are not feeling safe. We have to take extra precautions in terms of leaving our building, entering our building. We have an alarm system, a camera system, and I've actually been holding space, a safe space for our AAPI community, and providing healing circles and healing dance classes for our AAPI teaching artists and AAPI community members and allies just to come and feel like this space is there. We do not tolerate racism, hate crimes, like against any oppressed or marginalized group. So that's why I created this space. But I want people to know that we're not okay. There is not a single day that I haven't cried. There's not a single day that I don't grieve over what's happening in our country. There's not a single day that I don't fear for my elderly parents' safety. I have to think about where they are going. I want to know their schedule. So there's this extra burden on me emotionally, mentally, physically, that I don't think a lot of Asian Americans speak out about, because there is this model minority myth that, oh, Asians, these stereotypes towards Asians, that they're stoic and they're quiet and they won't speak out, and they just go with the flow and they don't want to rock the boat or whatever. But I feel like people need to know that we do speak out. And when we do speak out, we want to be heard, acknowledged, seen, and listened to. And so I would encourage folks on this call to provide that extra safety net for your employees, to at least maybe, there's therapy, um, a therapist that can help, or they can go take a class, a dance class or exercise class, or take extra time. This is a time of mourning. It's almost like people should be able to take bereavement leave for this, and just take time for themselves to reflect upon what is happening in our country in terms of our endangerment. So that's all I encourage folks to be able to do right now for your Asian employees, and understand that we are not okay. We can act like we are okay because we've been um, pretty much trained to do that. My mom would always tell me, like, shh, don't say anything, don't argue, just follow the rules and just do what they're asking you to do. But there are times where I feel like this is wrong. I don't feel like this is just wrong. And I want corporations or companies to feel like their Asian employees can speak out and just pour it all out without being judged. So provide a safe space for listening, acknowledgement, and care.
Anjanette, thank you. Wow, I felt it viscerally when you said we are not okay, and I think that's really the most important understanding that company leaders can take away from our conversation today. Besides the tips that we're going to give you on what you can do to show allyship, Dr. Miller, could you talk a little bit about from where you sit as an organizational behavioral expert and leadership expert with respect to there are triggering events. We've obviously had some triggering events, but this stress and this burden has been going on certainly since the pandemic started. So can you talk about what organization leadership should recognize? This is not just something that's been happening at this moment. There's been this progressive uh, sense of otherness and outright uh, hateful acts towards individuals. So what do organization leaders need to know?
Absolutely. And the first thing I want to share with everyone is that we're seeing nearly an increase of over 800% in acts of violence in the past year alone, compared to 2017, 18, and 2019 combined. We saw an uptick of nearly 3,000, slightly over, self-reported acts of hate crime from the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. And that's self-reported. So that is not just what maybe local law enforcement is reporting on, what others in the neighborhood are reporting on. And as Anjanette has really shared, when you're thinking about this community, some of the cultural norms that have been established have been ones that you might not hear voice as clearly. You might not hear the complaints as loudly as you would with other cultural groups. And so it's really important for organization leaders to take action right now, thinking about how can I be proactive before that request comes in, to take time, to take pause. Am I creating a space that's safe for conversation? Do I have dialogues in the organization where people can share their feelings, their sentiments? Am I providing resources without people having to dig them up to really say, it's okay, we're supporting you in taking your needs in mind? With that, I would say that's really the first step. Once you can really ensure that you've taken time for this community to come together to acknowledge pain, loss, grief, fear, anger, all of those emotions, then it's really about, are there safety precautions in place? Am I taking care of the psychological and physical needs of this community? And am I doing so in a infrastructure as well as an individual ally? Which means, if I have employees that are physically coming to location and working, am I ensuring that the parking lot is safe? Am I having people walk out in groups as safely as possible during these challenging times? When people are working from home, what do they need in order to feel safe in this time? We're hearing many of our clients saying, I don't even feel safe going out and getting groceries. So those are really two big measures that organizational leaders have to pay attention to right now.
And you mentioned cultural norms, and I suspect what you're really talking about is that, and Anjanette, I believe, alluded to this, which is AAPI community members may not speak up. They may be suffering in silence, right? They may be struggling in silence. Anjanette, used the example of her mom telling, her to shh, be quiet. So, but there's an enormous amount of stress given starting when the pandemic started, right? And the names that were being used by certain government leaders and others to name the pandemic and other things. So there's already been this others. I'm assuming that that's what you're referring to, right? That they may not be speaking, that in this particular case, you can't assess how well your employees are doing based on whether or not they're speaking up or they're sharing. Is that right? Would you agree?
Absolutely. And one thing I really want to make the distinction on is that while there are certain aspects of culture in the Asian and Asian American and Pacific Islander communities that may find that this is common to them, it's an enormous community. And so there's a lot of diversity in this community. Part of those harmful stereotypes, those harmful names, really come from kind of putting everybody in the same basket and assuming that everybody acts, looks, speaks the same exact way.
As a Latina, I can relate to that because that exists in the Hispanic community as well. There are different demographics that make up the Hispanic community. So let's talk a little bit about um, what do employees need at this moment in time? We talked obviously about physical safety. Are you as organization leaders communicating about physical safety? What can you do as leaders, as companies regarding physical safety? We slightly touched on mental health, but let's unpack that a little bit more because I know a lot of companies offer well-being assistance. So what are some things that organization leaders can be thinking about and communicating about?
First is, really showing support in terms of your communications, both in terms of what you're saying and what you're writing, and really what your brand and mission convey. And so attaching that and making it part of your business to be in a place of caring about your employees and the communities that you serve. So first and foremost, it's going to be, what are the ways in which you are acknowledging, right? So it's a piece of restorative justice, but it is a really important first step, which is acknowledgement. Don't be silent on this. Really place voice and your heart in the place of the community and show them that you care, show them that you notice, show them that you acknowledge what the loss is here.
So being silent actually communicates something. I've said that before, right? And in this instance, not saying anything actually is communicating something.
Absolutely. And it's communicating a very hurtful and painful something, which is that this doesn't matter enough for you to acknowledge it.
Mhm. Let's talk a little bit about stereotypes. So BiasSync, we're about mitigating bias, and in our professional development content that we roll out to large organizations and government agencies, we focus a fair amount on different biases, racial bias being one of them. And stereotyping is amplified right now. Maybe Anjanette, you can talk a little bit about how you're seeing that play out. Like, what are some of the stereotypes and how they're being amplified at this moment in time?
Stereotype in terms of like the model minority myth that Asians are good at math and that we're smart and we're silent, we're stoic, we don't speak up about injustice. There's that stereotype. And then there's that stereotype, the unconscious bias of just look at me. I mean, I have pink and gray hair, I'm a little punk rock, but there just could be that unconscious bias that I'm not educated, that I can't be taken seriously. So I have to constantly code switch in the spaces that I'm in, and that's exhausting. There's also another stereotype that from the Asian community that we don't seek mental health. Like anxiety, depression, PTSD is not a thing. When we see a doctor, is a doctor, primary care doctor or whatever, but not a therapist. So we do need that support. I see a therapist. I'm on medications because I do have PTSD, anxiety, depression, all those things because of what's happening in the world and because of the experience, lived experience I have gone through for about 20 years working in predominantly white institutions in PWIs. So there is this long-term mental, physical, emotional weathering that's happening to women of color, that we just have to endure. We just kind of give into the systems, that weren't set up for us. It's called institutional systemic racism for a reason, because these aren't structures that are set up for us to succeed. So I just want people to look past their unconscious bias. I know it takes a lot of work, but I think that it's a time that people look and listen and provide that space for their, people of color. We're not just talking about Asian Americans, we're talking about BIPOC, everyone that
You
is.
define BIPOC. I'm not sure everyone would know what that means.
Oh, okay. Black, Indigenous people of color.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
our BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, um, we're all marginalized people. We are oppressed people. And there is a lot of unconscious bias towards just having a little bit of melanin. There is this I've had it so many times with microaggressions, like, wow, you speak English so good, or where are you from? And I say San Diego, but where are you really from? That's painful. They want to know my ethnicity. Oh, you look so exotic. What are you? Those microaggressions have a long-term impact over our mental health. And so if there's a way that companies can provide even this EAP. I used to work for the city of San Diego, and we had an EA, employee assistance program, where we had a therapist, and I would use that therapist. It was free, and I would take advantage, and it was an amazing service that the city provided for its employees. Even making like a solidarity statement or having a newsletter or whatever saying we stand with Black Lives Matter and AAPI communities during this time, says a lot about the corporate social responsibility of the company and organization. And for the employees, that when I see a solidarity statement and concrete actions that are going to be implemented, I believe in that company. I believe that their employees are going to be safe. And yeah.
I was just going to say that we're going to talk a little bit about some concrete actions, some additional concrete actions that you can take in just a moment. There's some really valid points and actually really helpful insights is really more appropriate, Anjanette, for what you just shared. Dr. Miller, in a workplace, we already know some of the typical, uh, racial biases as it pertains to the Asian American Pacific Islander community, and in particular I want to talk about the intersectionality now between women and racial stereotypes, right? And in particular as it pertains to this community, right, you're expected to be docile or quiet or follow the rules and just head down, do the work kind of thing. I mean, that's the stereotype. And while we may be articulating that we want people to use their voices, we may be inadvertently defaulting to stereotypical thinking. And where I'm going with this is that therefore we may be inadvertently, punishing is probably too harsh of a word, but we may be inadvertently creating some additional difficulties for members of this community, both if they're, and especially if there's that intersectionality, where they're expected to be, conformative, that's the norm in many instances, and not speak up, but then, if they do, and then you've got the COVID impact of all those. So could you speak a little bit about that, just again, for our organization leaders, what to be paying attention to, some of these watch outs?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're thinking about it, you're right, there is intersectionality at play. So women in general experience bias based on their gender, but then people of color experience bias based on their skin color. And when you have both of those identities, you have an enhanced experience with bias, really and truly. And with the Asian community, we're seeing that, yes, women are being attacked more frequently in violent crimes compared to their male counterparts. And we're also seeing some intersectionality around age. So being elderly in the community really causes an increased risk factor as well. And part of this is a play on strength, or what is perceived as what quote unquote could be physical power, right? That these identities are stereotypically assumed to be less powerful than either the younger or more male counterpart in this particular identity. And so those are things that both women as well as elderly are faced with, being Asian American, or Pacific Islander. And in addition to that, what we're really noticing is that in the organization, there are stereotypes that transcend into just small behaviors, right? Assumptions, as Anjanette had said, around like what you're capable of versus what you're not capable of. So it might look like assuming the male youth in this community is really great at technology, or you mean you're not the IT person, right? Those types of stereotypes, we call these micro invalidations, where it is denying the experience of racism, and at the same time, they can have these powerful, almost compliments, right? The assumption that this is something positive, that it would be so great, right? If we all great at technology, math, that there's increased IQ, but really what the community is experiencing is like this assumption that you think I'm all the same. And even that comes out in microaggressions, right? Like, oh, I get you confused. You all look the same to me. Or having a lot of struggle with pronouncing names, particularly if those names might have some ethnic representation in them. And so really paying attention to how you are valuing your employees. Do you notice that their individual distinctions, their unique motivations and values that they bring in, and their strengths that they bring into your organization? Can you acknowledge their differences as a way to celebrate their uniqueness? And can you really pay attention to how, and nobody expects organizational leaders, nobody expects anybody to get it 100% right. I make mistakes in pronouncing names. I haven't met a person yet that is fluent in every language in the world, but it's about being humble in that inquiry, right? Which is starting out like, I apologize, I might pronounce this wrong, please correct me, and giving the person a little bit of power in that correction, and not just assuming that they'll correct you if you mispronounce their name.
Right.
And this goes a long way in terms of even just when we say creating that space for allowing employees to check in on their own mental health. They may not want to show up in the exact time and space that you want them to, but giving them that pass of saying, we're creating these dialogues, but if there's something else that you need, please reach out. Or if this isn't the right time, please know that I'm still here on the other end whenever you do want to talk, right? So doubling down and doubling in on your commitment to allyship is going to be really, really important for organizational leaders.
You mentioned these conversations. So here at BiasSync, we offer our clients facilitated, I call them facilitated conversations. Dr. Miller is one of our experts who leads some of the courageous conversations. They can be thematic focused, right? And so we've had them focused on various groups within organizations. And these are conversations that are led by an expert, meaning an expert such as Dr. Miller or others who can keep the conversation on track with some guardrails, but allowing for people to have a space to communicate and share what they're thinking, what they're experiencing. Perhaps you can talk a little bit more, Dr. Miller, about just creating these opportunities to do that.
Yes, absolutely. So these, as you've shared, these conversations really are modified dialogue formats. So we have maybe 2 or 3 big questions that we're asking a group in maybe 60 to 90 minutes. And in that time, really what I would do is probe with follow-up questions based on what the group is really surfacing. And some of those questions can sound like, what are you experiencing? Or what bias have you witnessed in the organization? And allowing people to really just share what's present, where they're observing, where they're feeling, and saying, what do you need? What now? What do you need? And allowing those themes to get captured for your organization so you can make concrete recommendations that are based off of the voice that is represented in your community. Now, with these, they're not easy conversations. They are emotional. And to kind of go back to that theme of like, what does stereotypes and bias look like in the organization? We've had many community members that are really sharing not only their pain in the organization, but rather their life pain, their experience across their entire livelihood. And this can bring about, tears, feelings that are negative affects to some extent, anger, fear, anxiety, and really sharing. And to counteract that stereotype, it's not, wow, I've never seen Anjanette cry. It's, how can I show up to support you? And what we're noticing is that, these big emotions can be shocking in business, in corporate, in your workplace. But that shock, when you say, wow, I wasn't expecting that, whether that's somebody's emotion or somebody's performance, that signals that you're surprised by what was done, said, enacted, that counteracted what you originally expected. So an expectation or assumption is there. And that's really the baseline for understanding, oh, there must be an unconscious association I have here.
Excellent. And so we've talked, just to kind of recap where we've been, and then I want to raise 2 other areas that I think would be helpful for organization leaders. The first is we've talked about physical safety, communicating around that where it's relevant and appropriate. Mental health support and other types of company resources. Watching out for inadvertent stereotyping, microaggressions, micro insults, micro invalidations, right? So invalidations are, conveying some way that's, what a person has shared or stated isn't that important, or it's not that big of a deal. That's what, micro invalidations are. Please, Dr. Miller, you're the expert, correct me if I've described that wrong. So we've talked about that. We've talked about creating opportunities for dialogue. And the suggestion, of course, is having some expert guidance around that. And then, so if I've left anything out in terms of what we've covered, let me know. And then from there, now let's talk about other ways that companies can show support. We've talked about performative allyship versus authentic allyship, meaning we amongst us have talked about that. Let's delve into that for just a little bit, because there's a huge difference in what that means. So maybe Anjanette, you can start that line of conversation.
Sure. I've seen a lot of performative allyship. So posting a black square or hashtagging stop AAPI hate or stop Asian hate for a day is not enough. It's cute, and it's trending. What about, I mean, we're still getting killed. Our people are still getting massacred and killed. So when it's not trending, we still need you to be there for us in solidarity and allyship. I think true allyship begins with the leadership and management, the people who have access to power and influence to really do it consistently and authentically. That means talking to your employees, talking to your people, checking in often, um, providing support, saying, what can I do for you? How are you feeling today? I'm sorry for what's going on in this country, and we're here for you. I've seen organizations put out racial equity statements, and they've worked on them for months. So working with, Dr. Miller and Michelle, like really working with them to craft a solidarity statement that would be helpful, and then concrete actions. Like, for example, there's a theater company that has a solidarity statement, and they say, we'll make sure that our creative teams are 50% BIPOC. We will ensure that what's represented on the stages are reflective of the community. We will ensure that our interns, who are mostly BIPOC, are getting paid. So they took this deep internal dive of, what are we doing that is perpetuating these cycles of oppression? And what can we do better to combat systemic racism? So these are painful conversations. And I think white folks are uncomfortable having the conversations, and BIPOC folks are having the conversations. And sometimes white folks feel like they're being attacked because they're not sure how to respond, because it's a different society where now BIPOC are standing up and speaking out. And historically, we've, just, we don't want to lose the job. We're fearful that we'll get retaliated or othered or whatever. So now I think there's this insurgence of being more outspoken. We feel empowered. And we're saying things now. There's demands being made. Like in the theater company, there's a coalition of artists that put together something called "We See You, White American Theater," and it's a hashtag. There's a whole white paper on it, and all these theater companies said, well, these are our demands and recommendations. So a lot of people are implementing them, looking at who they hire, how they hire them, how much they get paid, what free labor are they taking advantage of, calling it an internship and not paying them, who's on the creative team. You can't always just go to your, this is my crew, this is my team I always go with. It's a risk sometimes to then say, like, we're opening up. That's the safety that some white folks have. They're just referring to their inner circle. So now we have to be able to open up that circle and mentor the next generation of emerging leaders, which include BIPOC. So there's a lot of concrete, a lot of companies really putting out these solidarity statements and taking action. And it's a nice It's just a nice change of pace.
Yes, indeed. Dr. Miller, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's, as Anjanette has said, it's a call to action, and one that's not just trendy, one that's long term, which means that when you're thinking about the next piece, when you get beyond just taking the moment to acknowledge the loss, when you've really provided for safety, then it's really thinking about, how does this align with your organizational strategy long term? Is it embedded, not on the side, but is it embedded? And how are you holding up corporate social responsibility? Are you cultivating community partnerships that are representative of the communities that you serve? And in particular, if you are taking note right now and paying attention because you know that you have a good population that you serve that is either Asian, Asian American, Pacific Islander, or they're your employees, then it's time to think about how to work alongside the community partners like Anjanette, which is why I was so excited she was able to join us for the call today, because it's about being able to be in relationship with the community. And we have numerous resources within BiasSync to assist. We certainly have the assessment that helps you understand, your racial implicit bias. And we have culturally sensitive trainings that are designed to really understand the unique communities and what are the experiences there. But in addition to that training that you provide in your organization, you also have to go beyond training into meaningful connections and investing in what do those community partnerships look like that don't necessarily equate to your bottom line. So are you really connected with, and I'll just list off a few so that our clients can hear them, but stop AAPI hate. Hate is a virus. Asian American Advancing Justice, or the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council and Chinese for affirmative action, right? So all of these different organizations that can really help you in understanding the community and may also be able to provide the opportunity to network, right? So it's about getting these community partners inside your organization, as well as you doing outreach to the regions which you impact that can look like sponsorship programs, mentorship programs, having your employees and leadership go into local schools and show up and have conversations, as well as having shadow days in your organization and inviting the community members, particularly those that are underrepresented or marginalized, into access for career advancement that, yes, may be an indirect line. And it takes a long time to cultivate that trust in the community as well as those relationships.
And I think I would add to what you both just said is also aligning these activities and these actions, these demonstrations of support, authentic demonstrations, right? So that's the difference between performative and authentic allyship, is that you can align it with your overall DE&I strategy, vision, communications, make those connections, make the connections to your values. So if I were to sum up what we've talked about here, is I would say, and add to it if you would like, is first of all, don't do nothing. That is communicating something. And it's okay if you don't get it 100% right. At least trying and doing and showing support in some way or another communicates a lot, and that there's humility and humbleness to that, an admission that you may not get it perfectly right, but you're open to learning and evolving, leveraging the company resources and making a point of calling them out and that they're available. And I would add, we didn't talk about it, but also recognize that you may ask individuals, especially Asian American, Pacific Islander employees in your organizations, if there's anything you could do for them, but they may not necessarily want to talk about it too, right? So we have to just allow but at least just asking the question, and maybe more than once, periodically, expressing empathy. We talk a lot about cognitive empathy at BiasSync. That's part of our training and our solution, cognitive empathy. So expressing empathy, that's a good thing. And then exploring beyond that, external partnerships and other ways that you can demonstrate with alliances outside of your organization, your commitment to this community, that goes a long way. And Jeanette, you mentioned to me before we came onto this call that if companies made public statements, you would go to the mat to support them. Because, right? So you could share a little bit more about that. Yeah.
Good.
You'd even buy from them.
I buy from them. I think a lot of people would, because they would feel safe with their, their commitment to racial equity, their commitment to corporate social responsibility, because we're going to invest our dollars in people who show up for us. That's just, and now, there was the hashtag support Black-owned businesses, support women, minority-owned businesses, support Asian businesses. We need it right now. With COVID, it's just so incredibly difficult. We've actually my company has offered free healing dance classes, and people have been showing up because they want to, it's usually taught by an AAPI teaching artist, and anyone can come and just sweat it out. And we're teaching hip hop, we're teaching breaking, we're teaching ballet, modern, contemporary. So I even teach. So this week we're offering free healing classes, and sometimes people just need the distraction and they need to go to a place where they know there are other Asians here, there are other BIPOC here, and we're creating a safe haven for people to just express themselves freely without judgment. We have recreational dancers, we've got, professional dancers here, and it's open level, like it really doesn't matter. So I've taken my own corporate social responsibility and provided that as a service. And if anyone's interested in sponsoring more of those classes, I'd be willing to, talk to you all if you're interested, to have your employees come here. Sometimes they're like, oh yeah, I would totally be down to do that. Okay, and it's an Asian American teaching artist. Oh my gosh, and we're doing hip hop, and they forget about
Talk about counter stereotyping, by the way. Right? Yes, indeed.
Afterwards, we just kind of laugh and like we feel safe and we don't want to leave. It's a healing space. We've created that space, and I had to do it because I didn't have that safety at the PWIs that I worked for. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to take matters into my own hands and just do it myself. And, our teaching artists love that. This is BIPOC owned and led and operated, and they don't fear that. They don't have fear when they're here. And as an artist, you need to feel safe. You just need to feel safe that you're not going to be judged or like ridiculed or, stereotyped or anything like that. So we've created the space, and I'm sure a lot of Asian women-owned businesses right now are struggling. And there's, they talk about like all the support for Asian women, minority businesses. It's not true. I have not gotten one SBA loan or, yeah, I'm
As a business owner, I can help you with that. I can talk to you about it.
Okay.
Well, and I want
Yes,
to add in
but-
here too,
yes.
that it's really important to note that since the beginning of this pandemic, that there have been over 233,000 Asian American businesses that have closed at a disproportionate rate, actually higher than any other identifier when it comes to race or ethnicity. So really, they have taken the brunt of this in terms of stereotypes or biases. So just a really important piece to kind of hold as we have this conversation.
Yes, and I think, to Anjanette's point, I think, and as we look at obviously companies that are located in other places besides California, it's really looking for opportunities to support, Asian American, Pacific Islander community out in the world, not just internally. That says a lot internally when you demonstrate that you do that externally. For anyone who's joined, we will also be having a guide to help you internally, like a facilitation guide, to have some support there. So we will be having that available in the next week or so. So, feel free to communicate with us. And if you want to learn more about BiasSync, here's some information on how to reach us. Again, we are a SaaS-based solution to help companies train, mitigate, and measure for unconscious bias to lead to more fair and equitable outcomes in your organizations. Dr. Miller and Jeanette, thank you so very much for joining us today. Such an important topic. Truly appreciate, and literally, we came together in under 24 hours and just responding to the need of, the request from our company client leaders saying, can you help us? What can we do? So thank you both for answering the call, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.